Italy? Whiskey? Ah, Italy me! You could never unlock my secret. Oh no! Suddenly! Ah, no, leave me! Let's begin. Indeed.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and this is the Fireside Chat. And I am joined by my very special guest, Arvis Owens. And you, Arvis, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's good to have you. It's funny. We got a lot of messages from a couple of different people that had very similar reasons for coming on the show. It actually confused me, but you work with a group. It's just called, I got the link here in the description, called wouldyou.care, and you talk about essentially false allegations with regards to the military. Is that a fair, like, really short version of things?
Yes, Brian, it is. And specifically false accusations of sexual assault and domestic violence in the military specifically.
Yes. And what I was going to say, can you tell us a little bit about, like, how this got started and, like, what you guys do and how big your organization is and such?
Perfect. Thank you for that. So this all started about 2009, 2010. There was pressure via Congress, the president at that time, as well as the media, that the military wasn't doing enough to combat sexual assault, sexual harassment. So let me first start off by saying that we believe that, women should be believed and things should be investigated. The difference that we have is when the evidence shows that the person is innocent, then that's what should happen. So around 2009, 2010, the pressure ramped up on the military to get convictions. There was a letter from the then vice chair of the Joint Chiefs that was bragging about the military getting convictions in cases that civilians wouldn't take. So I want your audience to think about that for a second. Why wouldn't civilians take a case? Well, lack of evidence, not enough evidence, no evidence, or it's a false allegation. And yet, not only was the military taking those cases, they were getting convictions. And I have examples of those cases. So in 2013, I myself was falsely accused. I went to court-martial. I testified in my own defense. In a military court at that time, the person bringing the charges gets to pick the pool of the jury that judges you. They get to decide what evidence you can present and what you can't, who can testify and who can't. If you get experts, the whole 9 yards. So I was found guilty but sentenced to 0 jail, but I was forced to register as a sex offender and I was given a dishonorable discharge. So during sentencing, my jury came back and says, we made a mistake. Can we revoke that guilty verdict? And the judge said, and the judge asked why. And they said that my accuser had been saying inconsistent statements. So you and I call them lies, but in court, they say inconsistent statements. And the judge said she's been doing that the whole trial. So she didn't overturn it, didn't do anything. And then a series of missteps happened. So at first, it was about my case alone. I was working to kind of get that overturned and to get justice. And in the process, I met organizations. There's an organization called Save Our Heroes out of Texas, awesome people who started accumulating thousands of cases just like mine of military men, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and Coast Guard who were falsely accused and wrongly convicted. And slowly the story started trickling in and we started coming together to tell our story. We talked a little bit about the petition. In 2021, when we started that petition, the state of Virginia saw that, contacted DOD and removed me from the registry. And I want to put that in perspective. They never do that, right? They never do that. But it was, hey, we removed you. But in the military, you still have that criminal record. And something they do in the military is they title you. So if they investigate you and exonerate you, they still title you. So it looks like you have a criminal record. if you go to a non-judicial hearing, they also title you so you look like you have a criminal record. So again, it started with myself trying to get media attention and press attention to correct my own case, and then kind of fell into all these different organizations and groups and people who were doing the same. And that's how we really got started.
So there's a lot in there that I want to like dig a little bit deeper into. So you said that at some point in the recent past, the Pentagon or the government or the military said, we have to do something about sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual impropriety against women. At what time do you remember, or at least what year, when that I guess initiative began?
About 2010 is when it started.
2010. Okay. And then you said there was a point where they said, essentially, the logic being, we have a problem with sexual harassment or sexual assault, sexual impropriety in the military, and we know that this is happening for whatever reason, and so therefore, if we have to be getting a certain number of convictions, and we're not getting those convictions. So that sounds like, a hammer looking for a nail.
Yes.
So what I want to know is, do you know when that became the next thing? When did they start saying, okay, we have said that this is a problem, and now we are finding that there isn't enough solution to the problem that we know is there, even though we haven't looked into it?
Well, that also started in 2010, and I'm going to give your audience some examples that they can Google themselves.
Okay.
So he's not the commandant now, but if you look up Commandant of the Marine Corps Heritage Brief, we need more convictions. So this was a then Commandant of the Marine Corps who, speaking in front of young people, he didn't say we need more justice. He didn't say we need more investigations. He said, and I quote, we need more convictions. There's a case of a Navy SEAL where a 2-star admiral was his convening authority. So the person overseeing his case.
Mm-hmm.
When that 2-star admiral retired, he came back with an affidavit and said, I knew this guy was innocent, but I believe the president at that time and Senator Gillibrand, that the Navy or he would be punished in some way. And we have that affidavit. I can share it with you. You can share it with your audience if you want. And they were the Senate Armed Service Committee was looking at your rate of convictions of sexual harassment, sexual assaults to determine your promotion level, right? So, and even to this day, in the Army and the Air Force, I know for a fact, on the officer performance appraisals, there's a blurb on there about how the environment you create for sexual assault, sexual harassment. And the Army puts it on certificates and things like that. So that pressure started immediately. They wanted to see results, and they did that.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. I mean, I've seen this, for example, this happens on college campuses,
Yes.
where first you start from a conclusion, which is, there is a problem with sexual assault, sexual harassment, whatever. And we know it exists. We're not going to look into it. So therefore, we have to have a certain number of cases that essentially back up our conclusions. And I think it hurts a lot of men, especially on college campuses. So yeah, seeing this in military, does it surprise you?
It really did, and I'm glad you mentioned the civilian universities, because that happened around 2011. So there was a Dear Colleague letter where they took away due process. So for your audience who don't know, is someone makes an allegation and they would determine the results of that without allowing you representation, the accused, without allowing you to question the evidence. And that didn't change until Betsy DeVos became Secretary of Education, and she changed those rules. And then they recently changed them back for August.
Yes. So we are aware of that with colleges, with civilian colleges. Is that also is there something like that or parallel to that in the military?
So yes. So the difference in the two is the military has a court system too. So then you could go to prison as well as be a registered sex offender. So that's one part. And then they also have an administrative process where it's called non-judicial punishment, or Article 15, which is similar to the university, where the person overseeing it decides what evidence is used, decides the results, and you have to adhere to those. And so that's what they're doing now because people don't get visibility of that. So that's similar to what's happening at the universities.
Yeah, that sounds that. And so if you were subject to that court in the military, you couldn't then like appeal and go to a higher court.
You
Is that
can
like
appeal.
where the buck stops? Okay.
No,
okay.
you very much can appeal. Each service, the Navy and the Marine Corps together, has a criminal court of appeal, CCA. And so you do get an appeal, but we find in many of these cases, they did not act. And then the highest military court is called CAF, the Court of the Armed Forces. And then above that, you could go Supreme Court, but very few of those cases get looked at. And if I can give you a few examples of what I'm talking about to bring that home, would that be okay?
Yeah, go ahead. We got time.
So, imagine for a second, I'm sure some of your listeners watch the show CSI. And so you watch CSI or a show like it, and you'll see DNA evidence. We have military cases, Brian, where the person had DNA evidence it wasn't them, and the military didn't allow them to present it. So they got found guilty. Now, in many of those cases, they were eventually overturned after those men served in prison, after they'd been on the registry, and that they still have a record, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have cases where there was video evidence, and they didn't allow it to come into court. There was one young man, it was an Army case out of Kentucky, where she went to the civilian authorities first. They brought her in and recorded her statement, and she admitted it was consensual. She admitted she was about to get kicked out for physical fitness things. And so based on her own statement, they dropped the case. It was the Army had a CID agent in there to witness her testimony. 1 year later, the military brought the same charge against him because it's not considered double jeopardy when the military does it. But guess what they did? They wouldn't allow him to present the video evidence of her confession, and they would not allow that CID agent to testify. Again, they will deny evidence and do things like that. And so that's what we're talking about. It's you deny evidence. You don't allow information. They call it Brady violations, where we have a case, a retired police officer, for instance, her son, where his accuser had a felony conviction. They asked for that information a year prior. They got it the day before, like everything had done. He was getting something called a convening authorities action. So he couldn't use it in court, and he couldn't use it on his appeal, right? And they said, well, it only became available here. And to tell you a little bit more about she claimed that he had done all these brutal things. They got a special thermal camera to look at her skin. He said he'd bitten her, punctured her. Guess what? No marks on her body. And they knew the system was working because they could see the layers of her tattoo. But yet, he still got found guilty. He was unfortunately sentenced to 30 years.
Oh.
I would tell you another man I call the candy bar kiss. Imagine this. I want your listeners to imagine this. A guy's at a bar. He's 21, hanging out with his friends. And a lady comes in, wants to dance with him. She's dancing, doing shots, dirty dancing. She is talking suggestively, not only in front of him, but in front of his friends. They're hearing it, whooping and hollering. She asked him, can they go back to his barracks and play around? So he's like, sure. She takes him there. They have relations. And then afterwards, now this woman had 4 children and was married. And she told her husband she was going out for a candy bar. But they had unprotected sex, and she wants a morning after pill. So she calls the hospital, and they say, were you a victim of rape? They ask her several times, and she finally reluctantly says yes. She goes in and takes the test, but she doesn't want to press any charges. She just wants to get that pill. Well, they go look at the video footage from the bar. They arrest him, and that young man was sentenced, I believe, 20 years in prison. So I want your readers to think about that. The testimony of his friends and what she said, her taking him back to the room, and him not allowing to present. She lied to her husband, said she was going out for a candy bar. When she went, she's doing shots and talking all this stuff. Brian, I think it's important. We believe in equal rights, but there's also equal responsibility and equal accountability. And that's something a lot of people won't talk about. So thank you.
No, yeah, absolutely. That's like that's kind of like where we are when with the show that we do. It's always like we have to talk about not just like accountability and responsibility, but duty, because it seems to be. I mean, you served, right? You're a veteran.
Right.
And so, like, thank you for your service. But yeah, like, it shouldn't be limited to people. Like, I think everyday people, they have duties, they have responsibilities. It's called being an adult. These are simple things, but for some reason, there's something nobody wants to talk about. It makes people very uncomfortable. So, and unfortunately, there's like really serious consequences, like the one you just told me about. That's a terrible story. Like, if I was a young man in the military and I heard that, I would never go out. I would not enjoy myself.
Well, and that's a lot of people think, well, I'm talking about spouses falsely accused. They want custody of their children, or they want, a division of property. And let me go back to that veteran question. I consider myself a veteran, but the system doesn't. Even though I had 21 years of service, because of that dishonorable discharge, it gets wiped away. So I've got that 21 years, is that they don't consider me a veteran because you have to have, I think it's a couple of years of honorable service. So with an officer, it's all or nothing. So I consider myself a veteran, but the system does not, even though I did serve for 21 years.
Well, thank you for your service regardless. And
thank you.
I think you're a veteran, but can you tell me about your story? Is that too personal or is it okay?
No, I can't.
So yeah, okay, okay.
So like I said, it was a coworker. Shouldn't have done it, but I did.
But it was consensual and all that.
Here's what I share with people, and I testified in my own defense. Is as an example, she is her own testimony. She claimed I didn't raise her pencil skirt. She didn't raise it, but that her pencil skirt automatically flew into the air, causing her legs to open, causing her to straddle me and open mouth kiss me on a chair. But in her mind, she was not consenting, and that I should have known that. And then she leaves and comes back again for more of that. But again, in her mind, she was not. Now, like I said, I was charged with 7 counts of sexual assault, found not guilty of 6, and the 7th one, they asked to go back and revote it. I was also charged with violating a general order. She admitted I didn't do it. I testified I didn't do it. The judge says we have a problem, that there's no evidence he did this part. And then soliciting someone other than your wife, which I did do. So it's kind of like the 2-star general who was just convicted. Is he didn't sexually assault, but yeah, he did have an extramarital relationship. And so I did do that. And what I tell people, it's like speeding in a car, but you get a death sentence on top of that. So
yeah, for sure. I get it. Like you said, there could be parts of the story where you're like, yes, I was wrong for that. That decision was morally wrong, whatever. But that's not the same as a criminal offense. Right. So, and that's a whole, those are like different things that happen on the same night. So, because I'm looking and I saw, I think it's, are you still married? Did this have an effect on your marriage or?
Well, of course it did. We went to counseling and we worked through some very difficult things. We still work through some things. So we're still together. Yes.
Are there kids involved?
Yes. I have 2 children, 2 twin boys.
Yeah. Do you think that, it was setting aside the moral question, in terms of like the legal part of it, like this could have separated you from your kids for like long periods of time, right? Like you could have had serious.
Of course it could have. And I will tell you, with many of the men I help and represent, they don't have access to their children. They can't see them. They can't see them at all. I know men who can't go to their kids' graduations. They can't interact with them at all. And so I was very fortunate in that respect that I get to see my children. They're upstairs now, probably making more noise than they should. But most of the men, they get 0 custody. They get 0 visitation in many cases, or if they do get anything, it's supervised. And so someone has to be there in order for them to spend any time with their children. They can't take them to school. Brian, I tell people, I don't think they understand what it's like to be a sex offender in this country. Is you have white collar jobs don't want to hire you because of the liability insurance. They're afraid that if someone else were to accuse you, then the liability insurance is going to cut a 7-figure check. Their premiums will go up, and then the public will think ill of them. There are jobs out there that are to hire you if you murdered people, but not if you're found guilty of a sexual assault. And in the military, again, they don't know what's happening. Congress just signed a bill so that your son, 18 to 26, I think it is, automatically gets registered for selective service, so he can be drafted, right? Yep. And the Senate wants to add women to that. And so I want you to imagine that for a second. It's because part of the things that are happening is people know that these things are happening and they don't want to be in that environment, so that your son, your male loved one, will be forced to do that. And so if people don't say this is not okay, so we get a lot of moms of boys who say, wait a minute, so you mean my daughter will be believed, but my son will not, regardless of the evidence he presents? And I go, sadly, yes. Yep. That is, in fact, the case. And so getting people angry about that to the point where they act, Brian, is like climbing Everest with no oxygen.
Yep, it sure is. I mean, that's, again, you're preaching to the converted, man. Like, we've been, it's so hard to get people to have empathy for what men go through, whether it's a father unable to access his kids or a homeless man or whatever. You have to almost make it about boys so that people start to see, oh, wait a minute, boys become men later, you know? So yeah, really serious stuff. I mean, really, and such a shame. So like in colleges, they have a kind of court. It's a kangaroo court, basically, in the way that they deal with these issues. But ultimately, it's in the university's interest, in most cases, to just find the guy guilty, expel him, whatever, just destroy his future and send him packing. And one thing that I think that what we don't want to address, because it's kind of scary for people, is that sometimes women don't act in the best interests of society. Like sometimes they do what they want and they think about how they benefit in the moment. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that as a reality. It's not even really about equality or whatever, fairness. I mean, if a man is evil, we call it what it is. If a man does good, we should call it what it is. If a woman does evil, we should call it what it is. So, and I think that just based on that one story where the woman wanted to get the morning after pill or Plan B or whatever it was from the hospital, she had to make a false allegation in order to get it, but she was willing to do it because she wanted to get the pill for free or what, you know, right. Because I guess they would have treated it like an emergency and she would have gotten it for free.
Plus, how do you explain to your husband where you been and you got hickeys and all this other stuff? You need a story for that.
Well, the Snickers bar attacked her, you see. And
right. You know what? I don't know which candy bar it was. I like Snickers. I don't want to.
Could have been a Mounds. Could have been an Almond Joy.
So we don't want to say that. And I'm glad you mentioned about the universities, because I work with some of those people as well. I work with a couple of units of people who do the university stuff. And to your listeners, it not only affects your college student. I found out this. I didn't know this. But those Title IX rules apply to high schools and middle schools and elementaries. So your small son could also find himself in a situation where they apply these same rules. So don't think it's just colleges. So
absolutely, 100%. It does happen. We cover the craziest stories that, you know, where there are stories where a woman, like a teacher, raped her student, got pregnant, and he's paying child support. So he's like 13, you know. Right. And I guess she's not on the sex offender registry. So it's crazy. So what are some of the things that you guys are doing with this petition? I'm going to display it on the screen. It's from change.org. It's falsely accused and wrongly convicted former military service members need your help. It's got 2,169 signatures, and you guys are trying to get to the next goal, 2,500. Tell me a little bit about this, and I put a link to it in the description. So
hey, thank you again so much. Would love any of your listeners to please sign and share it. What we're asking for in that is an independent review of the cases. we're not asking you to believe us just because we're coming and telling you this today. We want an independent third party to look at these cases and speak the truth. So what we're trying to do with that petition is raise enough awareness of what's happening so that the president can act, the military can act, and Congress can act. We also want to educate with it so that people considering the military for their children, they can know the other side of what's happening. Because again, most news sources are not going to share this with you. So that's what we're trying to do with the petition. We would love to get it in front of the president, get it in front of Congress, get it in front of the military. And I'll tell you something. We had an expert tell us someone was suppressing it. I don't like to do conspiracy theories, but so it might be.
What do you mean? Like somebody was suppressing it?
So 3 different people told us. So we had an IT specialist look at it, and he said, "Hey, you realize someone's suppressing this petition?" Well, I can spell IT, but that's it. So I go, "Okay, what do you think?" And he said, "Yeah, not a huge effort, but someone's paying some 6-figure money to suppress this." And I go, "Well, okay, all we can do is share it and try to get enough attention." So 1, we hope to get media attention. 2, we hope to consolidate some stories so people can see it, know there's other people like you. And 3, like I said, we eventually want to get it to the military, to Congress, to the president so that there's real change.
Why do you think? So first of all, I guess the IT guy knows how it was suppressed, but why would someone do that? Do you think? Do you have any? I mean, I'm sure you've given it some thought, but
I have, of course, given some. So it was an IT guy, it was a marketing person, and it was an investigator. So all 3 independent who don't know each other told me. But again, I go, well, what can I do? So the idea is this. I want you to think about this for a second. So I want your listeners, because I know you're going to be skeptical. They have to be. I would be too. I would have a hard time. That's why we have documents that I'm willing to share with you that they can read at their leisure. Let's pretend for a second that all of this is completely true, that Congress, all the way up to the then president and senior members of the military, were forcing convictions regardless of the evidence. Are you going to let your son join the military? And think about that, 80% of the military is male, I believe it is. So do you want that information known? Not to mention what they've done is illegal, and in theory, they should be held accountable for it, criminally maybe, financially maybe. So what incentive do they have to let this story be known and validated? You tell me. So that's my take. Again, I can't prove that to you, but that is what I have thought about, and that's my take.
that is, yeah. I mean, I find it because we are suppressed. I think that our a lot of people come up to us and they say, "Why don't you guys have like 1 million subs?" And I think it's because what we talk about, it's not just hard for people to wrap their heads around. I don't like to come across that elitist. I think it's more because it is a conversation, that's how I see it, that is not allowed to take place on the, with as much of a public exposure, I guess, and then is comfortable. But then that begs the question for me, and this is the same thing with with what you guys are doing, because I think there's a lot of overlap here. What is it that they're afraid to lose if we are essentially treating men in the military, wherever it is, with more due process, basically giving them like their constitutional rights to a fair trial and a speedy trial and all this other stuff? And it seems like, to me, a lot of this is like courts, military courts, college campuses, whatever, looking for every possible loophole to get the fastest conviction, to meet some kind of standard of convictions, because again, we have to ask ourselves, why is there a presumed minimum number of convictions that we have to cross the bar for when we haven't even looked into whether or not any of this is happening in the scale that is proposed, right? And why is it that all of these loopholes, that they're taking all these shortcuts, all of these, quick and dirty, let's get them out of here, let's whatever, without any consideration for how that will affect that gentleman? I mean, you already went through like all of the ways that it hurts a man just to be falsely accused. That, I mean, that's like, it doesn't even have to result. They could be in the process of fighting for their rights, you know, and they would be socially ostracized. They would be considered, you know, a dangerous person, all this. So their reputation is already ruined. This is before anything else. Yeah. So like, go ahead.
I'm glad you said that. I was going to give you two quick stories. So one is about somebody who was on a university campus that I'm aware of. His mother helps run a great organization to where he was falsely accused on a university campus. The police investigated and said, nope, no crime. He goes in front of his university body and they go, no crime, and they still punish him anyway. He eventually goes to law school. He applies to over 24 law schools, maybe 30-ish. I'm sorry, I'm mistaken. He applies to law school, gets in. He applies to 24 to 30 law firms, and he can't get in. And finally, one of the mentors say, well, hey, you got accused of this. So to your point, the police exonerate him. The university did, but they still label and punish him, even though they found him not responsible. And yet he was punished. And so he keeps a very low profile. I've tried to get him to interviews because look at how he was punished. He recently got a job at a law firm and he wants to keep a low profile. And then the other thing I'll point to about why with the suppression and stuff, there's a fabulous young lady who interviewed us. Her podcast is called A Little Bit of Life Podcast, Tabitha Newell. She is incredible. And what I love about Tabitha is she tells both sides, you know, just like yourself, is she tells both sides. So it was a TikTok video about one of our falsely accused and got about 3 million hits. And then she was canceled, right? So in that story, and he's from Chicago, shout out Matt Lapart from Chicago, Illinois, his brother Jim Lapart, always fighting for his brother. He has video evidence of the sex, right? And they wouldn't allow him to play that in court. So imagine that. She said that he did this. He videotaped it legally. He can't present that in court at all. She had done some fraudulent things. He couldn't present that in court. And then you have an influencer who has the courage to put the story out, and she gets canceled. She loses that account, I believe, and all of those followers because she had the courage to put that story out. So to kind of in a long way answer your question, people are scared that they're going to be punished with just the accusation. They're going to be punished with just bringing light to the story. So that's why I think people are so silent on it.
Yeah. And well, I don't know, like the other thing too is that if this is concealed, like this, I guess this issue. So, okay, let me try to, let's back up for a second because I want to address the problem and I want to be very rational and fair. Okay. So the issue is that because in the military, you're going to run across women. Some of them are in the military. Some of them are people you run into, like, I guess when you're, you know, on leave or whatever, you know, you're stationed someplace, you go to the bar and you meet somebody. But they're essentially, as a man in the military, you're going to come across the opposite sex. And especially if you're like a young guy, you're probably going to take an interest in some of these women. So, and this is not like a new thing. It's been going on forever, but it seems like this particular, I guess, epidemic of false allegations is recent. And I think the main reason for it is, I gotta say, it seems to me that it's because the system can be exploited for this purpose. It's not necessarily that women have changed in some way, but rather that the bad behavior in women is incentivized by the system. The system says, if you accuse this guy of rape, we'll take care of you, we'll protect you, they'll protect their identity, whatever. And it doesn't matter if they're committing fraud, essentially, and, you know, putting someone in prison or at least ruining their life socially because they want to get away with something. So the issue seems to me, at the very least, it's not a behavioral thing, it's not really a woman thing, but it's more like the system is made that way. And I assume that a man couldn't do the same to a woman in the military or even another man in the military. Could they? I mean, I don't know if there's any cases of a flip of this.
I don't. All the cases I have are heterosexual, and it's a woman and a man. So I'm not saying it could, because I don't know. But let me address your questions. So number one, I believe that the majority of women would not do something like this. So the one thing we ask and we take exception to is when this first started happening, they would use the 2% rule. They would say only 2% of accusations are false. I would ask, where'd you get it from? Like, where did you get it and how did they determine it? They couldn't. So they were saying 2%. And then they changed it to 2 to 5%. And now they're saying 2 to 10. When I've seen studies, the FBI did a study of 25,000 cases. We can find that where they said 25%. There was a prosecutor, 30 or 40-year prosecutor that the military brought in. He said, they said what, 1%, 2%, 5%? He said closer 10 to 20%. So I want to say that I don't think it's all, but it's a significant enough number. And you're correct. In the military, they get to pick their duty station once they're a victim. They get disability payments. They get forgiven for collateral misconduct. So if you've done something wrong and you say you were the victim, well, then that's forgiven. And then I think there's a job placement program after that helps you get a job after because of your victim status, and things like that. So you're right, is that they've incentivized the system to say it's a get out of jail free card if you've done something. And so I don't know if it would work that way for a guy to guy because I haven't seen it.
I would guess not. I mean, I guess, not that it's super important. I was just curious about whether or not this systemic problem is bidirectional. I think it comes in part because we have a tendency to bias in favor of women because we do want to protect women. It's evolved, it's biological. And to your 2% thing, that we've talked about that statistic countless times. The fact is we don't know. Like, I mean, because the problem is this. When they say percentage of false allegations, they're essentially only talking about cases where it's proven that the allegations are false, not that maybe they didn't necessarily prove it in a court of law, because a lot of times the men that are accused, they don't make a counter claim, they don't go after her legally. There isn't really anything in the law like that's really severe for a woman that essentially punishes a woman for making a false allegation. A lot of times they make it and then they drop it. They don't go on with it. So because when they drop a case, for example, that's not counted as part of that percentage. And I mean, I guess it should, because it means that she didn't really want to go through with it. But yeah, I mean, that's why the truth is we don't know. Like, it could be a lot, but the problem is that this one of these things that we can't really know the answer to, because again, it presumes that she is intentionally lying, not making a mistake, not misinterpreting a situation, and she's doing it with malice, like with the intent to destroy this man, which does happen. There's lots of, and then there, again, like we said before, there are systemic things that incentivize that. So, if a woman finds that she's in trouble because she cheated on her boyfriend, and this is a very common thing, they will make the allegation because then they get out of that trouble, for, like, what was the name of there was a very famous, I think he was, I know he's an athlete. His name was Brock Turner. Do you know about the Brock Turner case? It's from years ago. And that go ahead.
I don't remember all this. I was going to think of two others, the punt guy, Matt Arvizo, and the Trevor Bauer, the baseball player.
Trevor Bauer, yeah, the baseball player, yeah.
Here's what I was going to say with that, to where with the Matt Arvizo, the punt guy thing was they looked at the video, and it took him a year, and he was gone when what she said happened. And then they looked at all the video, and her own friends testified against her. And I think, to your point, the bigger thing is she wasn't punished legally in any way. So she was allowed to make all those allegations. He was dropped by the Buffalo Bills. Fortunately, he was picked up by, I believe it's Kansas City picked him up. But, for a while, his life was ruined. He had to sue her. And with Trevor Bauer, I follow him on, I think it's Twitter. He sued his false accusers, showed that they were false allegations, and MLB won't give him an opportunity. Like, he like literally, he's willing to take the veteran minimum, but he's proven the false allegation. Nothing happens to the accuser, and they were looking for money in those cases, and yet his life is still ruined. I mean, he's had some opportunities. I know he played in Japan, and I think he's still playing in Mexico, but he deserves a shot in MLB. And so, to your point, you're right. Do they count that in the false accusation category? Right.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I saw one thing one time where, in order for them to count it as a false accusation, the accuser had to admit she made it up. And you go, wow, that's the standard, even when the evidence doesn't support what she claimed happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we have countless. So I'll give you another example. We have a person who, they were on a Navy ship. They overheard 3 of the female shipmates conspiring to falsely accuse one man, because apparently he had slept with all 3, right? So he's a playboy, and they called him an F-boy and some other things. Yeah. And they also wanted to get off the ship. So she's in the berthing. She hears it. They're going to get together and accuse him of sexual assault. So she goes and tells the ship, hey, this happened. The ship refuses to act. She goes and she tells the JAG, the Judge Advocate General Corps, the lawyers in the military. They refuse to touch it. And then on top of that, she goes to the Inspector General. They also refuse to touch it. Those 3 women come forward, accuse the young man. He's found guilty and sentenced to prison. All because, was he cavalier in his dating life? Yes. Is that a crime? It's not a crime. And it's definitely not something that warrants jail or sex offender registry. And those women were rewarded for that. They were never punished. And you're right. That's what happens when you put a thumb on the scale and you discount the evidence. So the hard part is, nobody wants to admit that that's what they did, because to admit what they did would invite liability, would invite ridicule. And so, I mean, we've had people privately say mistakes were made, is what they said. When we bring this up, they said, hey, look, we were overzealous. Mistakes were made. Is it a mistake if you did it on purpose, Brian? I don't know.
No,
you tell me. You tell me. I mean, I'm from Texas, and so,
that's a good question.
From me, but
let me confer with my lawyer, and I'll get back to you. But so then we have this problem, and I think that we see this over and over again. How do men in the military protect themselves?
I'm glad you asked that. And so I'm going to say something that is extremely controversial, and I'm not sure. You need to check the legalities. I believe you should have a 24/7 body camera all the time. A 24/7 body camera with audio. Now certain states are one party and 2 parties, so you need to check the legalities. And I'm saying this jokingly, but not joking, is you need a 24/7 omnidirectional body camera with the audio and then maybe, right? Because we've seen in some of these cases, they don't even allow the audio to be presented. I'll tell you about another case, and you'll find him on the petition. He finds out his ex-wife's having an affair, right? So she not only has an affair, she gets pregnant with the affair partner's baby. So he, like an adult, he files for divorce. He's not putting things in her coffee and things like that. He just files for divorce. He gets awarded custody of their daughter. And so, Brian, I want your listeners to really think about what it takes for a man in this country to be not only awarded custody, but custody of a daughter.
Oh, right? We know. Oh, yeah, we know. Right. It's extremely... He must have been an exemplar citizen. She is a real, piece of work for that to happen.
So he gets awarded custody, and then she accuses him of sexual assault. She goes to not 1, but 2 civilian police agencies who go, no, and they throw it out. Strike 3, she goes to the military. They file charges. Her attorney goes to them that if he gives up custody, they'll drop the charges. She will. He goes, no, I didn't do this. They go to court-martial. He gets found guilty, sentenced to prison. His mother, who is an amazing woman and takes this initiative, calls the lover, where he admits he got $10,000 and that he lied in military court. Oh, and we have the recording too, by the way. So he admits he lied. The military has a hearing to hear his, well, he admits that not only did he lie, but that $10,000 was an installment. It was $100,000.
Ooh.
But the military doesn't have jurisdiction over civilians. So they can't prosecute him in a military court for lying. And you would think the young man's asking for a new case. They go, the first round, the judge says, well, I don't have the authority to do anything with this case. So we asked the question, why would you hold a hearing if you had no authority to do anything in the case? So then they change it and they go, well, the judge could have done it, but he used his discretion not to. And he submitted it too late. That's what it was. So then we go, why would you hold a hearing to hear evidence that was submitted too late when he had proof that he had submitted earlier, right? But they never could. And so, I mean, cases like that, where we present it to you and we go, we have another young man who was a military prosecutor at the time. And his wife claims that he was abusing their daughter by tickling her in the presence of a social worker. And even though the social worker testified that it wasn't true, he was found guilty and sentenced to prison. He's in prison today. I talked to his parents. Those are the type cases I want your listeners to understand. And I tell parents, ask the recruiter how easy it is to get sharped. Ask them what they're doing about false allegations and wrongful convictions. And then I want you to listen for the answer, and I want you to listen for what they don't say. And then you make the determination if this is something you want to present to your child, if this is something you want to be in. Last story for now, we have a young man. We have a young man who in 2019, he was accused. He goes to court martial, he gets found not guilty. He goes to college, he graduates recently, like now. He applies for 64 jobs, doesn't get one interview. He finally finds out it's because the military titled him. When they start the investigation, they title you. So he still has that label. He's in the FBI database, even though he got found not guilty. That's what the military will do, even if you go through the administration process. So it's even more severe than what they're doing in college. And most Americans have no idea, zero idea that it's happening.
Yeah. And this is because the military is trying to protect itself while also doing this, or something, right? It's wild that those, you could do a top 10 craziest military false accusations listicle video and probably get 1 million views. Are those the top ones, or the ones that
we've got tons of others. We have another one where, and I sent him the link, so hopefully he's watching, where his false accuser accused 5 other people in his family. They're all civilians though. Investigated by the civilian police, it's trash. But the military took his case, number 6, and he's not allowed to have any 5 of these testify in his defense. And none of the evidence matches what she says. How about another one? The young man is stationed in Korea. His wife has an affair with a cop, moves in with the cop. She accuses the cop of sexual assault that she lives with. But do you know why he was safe? He had his body camera on. So the police call his colleagues, and they look at the body camera footage and says, oh, she's lying. They still won't arrest her, Brian. The only thing they'll do is she has to leave the premises. She packs her stuff up. So then her husband finds out. He sues for divorce, and I think they had some controversy over property ownership. So she accuses him, I think, of domestic violence or something like that. Guess what? He's in Korea. He's like, no, I didn't do this. He's not allowed to have the cop who had the proof testify in his case for his defense, right? He's not allowed to have that. He gets found guilty, and you're just like, you got to be kidding me. He get found guilty, and he's not allowed to present all. So there's so many cases, or this will make the top 10 list. There was a time in the military during this time period where if the accused had one drink, the accuser had one drink, she couldn't consent. I want you to think about that for a second. Your listeners.
No, we know about that. That's another what do you call it? That's another one of these like bugaboos from from around this whole rape culture
Right.
theory thing, which is a woman who has had one drink cannot consent because they are under the influence. One drink. It could be a beer.
Correct.
It could be one of those, like this isn't alcoholic, but it could be one of these, like these Trulies or White Claws,
Yeah,
Yeah,
so here's what I always tell people. I go, imagine going out for your anniversary. You're married, you go out for your anniversary, and your spouse has one drink, and now they can't consent. They can drive legally in every state and territory in the country, but they can't consent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you find them guilty. We have cases where the young lady said, hey, I drank too much. But then she says, well, I only had one drink. And her BAC was well below the limit. And then she says, well, I got drugged. And so we do a toxicology report and there's 0 drugs in her system. And then she says, well, maybe I took this drug. But again, there was no drugs in your system. Or a case of a young lady who took an Ambien, goes into a guy's room, has sex with him, and then says, well, I couldn't consent because I took an Ambien. How the hell did he know you took an Ambien? And that guy gets convicted. So you're right. Some of these cases, you hear them and you're just like, I can't believe that. I can't. And you go, well, that's what they are. And
yeah.
And you go, look, that's the type of pressure they were under. We had he's a defense attorney, and I think we got the audio when he said this. He talked about a case he had before he went to court in the military, where the day before trial, they gave him her psychological records. Brian, she was getting treatment because she wanted help for making false accusations. She said in her therapy session, I have a problem. I like making false accusations. The military knew the whole time, the whole mother trucking time, and they gave it to him the day before, but they were trying to get him to take a deal. Hey, take this deal, take this deal. He's like, I didn't do it. And it's, wait a minute, she's getting treated psychologically because she admits she has a problem making false accusations. I mean, again, when you tell people this stuff, I get it, right? They think, we belong in Slytherin in the Harry Potter series, and we're like, no, like we don't, but we're, Hufflepuff or Gryffindor, maybe, or Ravenclaw. I don't know. But it's, those are the type of cases I'm talking about, where you look at the evidence and you're like, we've got text messages, can't use them. Video evidence, can't use them. Eyewitness, nope, they can't testify. Another one, and it's a young man, I hope he's looking. He's having sex in a room with her best friend next to them in the bed, and she's on top, right? And so the best friend leaves the room when her friend starts to orgasm, right? And I don't know why she stayed in there if she wasn't participating to begin with. That's a whole nother question. Someone else tries to come into the room. She shoos them away to finish. 6 months later, her fiance finds out about the situation. And then she says she was raped, but she doesn't want to press charges. But her fiance says, if you were raped, you have to, for us to keep this. So that
it makes sense. I mean, because otherwise it doesn't look good for the relationship. So
correct. And so that man went to jail for years. I think he's still on parole or probation. His life is restricted, damaged in ways that it's so hard to explain, where you're like, we have another case where the accuser wrote a letter saying, I'm not a victim, but I was going to get in trouble if I didn't become a victim. So that's why she's testifying. And he got found guilty of that, right? So you wrote a letter. And then speaking of letters, we have a letter from another young lady who these investigators go to her house and says, if you don't testify against this guy, we'll tell your husband you were having an affair with him. And she kicks him out. And she goes, get the hell out of my house. I wasn't. So you had investigators putting pressure on them. And then last piece of that, we had someone who worked for the victims' rights groups. And she gave us some documents. I'll share them with you if you want. how to win your MST, and MST stands for your military sexual trauma case, with zero evidence. So there are private Facebook groups, right? The only reason we knew is she told us. We wouldn't have known. And we gave that to people, and they hemmed and hawed. But I want your listeners to hear that again. How to win your military sexual trauma case with zero evidence. They were coaching accusers.
Well, they were coaching false accusers.
But they don't see it that way. And you go, wow.
Well, they got to get those convictions. I can't think of any other reason to do it other than we gotta get these numbers up. These are rookie numbers, right? I want you to send me that document, that how to win your military trauma case with zero evidence. I want to see that. That's I'm not saying I don't believe it. I do.
No.
I do believe it.
Yeah.
But I think it would be good for us to go through it on the show sometime because it's wild. So like, why we're kind of like getting to the hour here, so we're gonna wrap it up. But I find this a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure that people are gonna love this, and they're gonna totally watch this later. But like, why would the military do this? I mean, I know that we kind of like touched on it, but like, this is like, it's crazier than college. It sounds like, anyway.
It is.
And it seems like the whole thing seems to be, for me, all about, I don't want to deal with this. Let's just, destroy his life, clean break. This happened to you. That's it. We're going to move on. Like it's almost like they just got to get him through, and they're not considering the actual collateral damage, which is and then like guys get sent to prison. Like they somehow, they're more, I guess you could say, they're less forgiving than civilian courts are and civilian police are, right?
Of course. So here's this is my theory about why. So one, they had congressional pressure, and Congress writes the checks, right? So you can't tell your boss no. Not to mention the media was piling on the pressure as well. So the military cares about the 4 R's: resources, think money; recruiting, retention, and reputation. So it was harming the 4 R's, so they have to act. And so that's where I think it comes from a place of, if we go after every case, then it'll stop happening, is I think their logic is, if we go after these, no matter how ridiculous, well, then people will get the message, the memo, and there will be nothing. I think that's what they were thinking, but I can't prove that.
Yeah, but then the men in the military are not aware of this stuff because you're not able to explain. So they're just going to keep making the same. I don't want to say mistakes, because I think some blame should go to the men, because they are fooling around with women in the military and whatever, and they don't know what the stakes are. Even a civilian man is at risk. And the thing is, you were talking about the body cam thing. Like, I don't even think that would be enough. Like, even if they had an omnidirectional 4K body cam with, like audio, Rode microphone, because there's cases in the civilian world, and in some of the examples you gave, where like these men could be accused of things by women they don't even remember, they never met. Maybe they were both drunk, and a lot of times they are both drunk. There's no like, I was drunk and he wasn't. Usually everybody's drinking, and so like that wouldn't protect you either. So the issue seems to be, just like you said, they're looking at the bottom line, and they're cutting. They're cutting their losses. Like, well, we don't want to deal with this because it takes time, it costs money, and we can't deal with everything. So we'll just be really hardcore on it, and hopefully it'll just stop. But unfortunately, the men in the military don't know that could happen to them. So they're just kind of carrying on as normal because there's no messaging. Do you hope that what you're doing will not just like raise awareness around this, but get people talking about like ways that the I guess the system could be improved? Because obviously it seems like it needs to be like gutted and started over. Like, you need to do something completely new, like reform it. But also, could it like be, are you also hoping to reach men that are already enlisted, they're already in, a branch, and they should know this for their own protection.
We do, and we have. And so I would tell you, we're fighting for a conviction integrity unit. A conviction integrity unit or an innocence project represents every American in every state or territory except the U.S. military. So we want to educate people in the military. We want to educate anyone who will listen, and we want these laws to be changed. We want these cases to be corrected. The metaphor I use is, imagine someone burned down a bunch of houses, but they say, I won't burn down any more, but I don't want to pay for the houses I already burned down. Would you be okay with that? So think about Agent Orange and how we treated those men who were exposed to Agent Orange for decades before we acknowledged and took care of it. And that's the military's model, is deny, destroy, delay, downplay, deflect. And so they want everybody to die off in 80 years or so, and then they can say, you know what, that was a time, we don't do that anymore. So yes, you're 100% correct. We want to bring attention to this so they change it so we can continue to be the best military in the world, the fair and just military in the world. That's what we want.
Yeah, but so, yeah, I mean, I think that a country needs a military, and so we're going to have one. So let's have a good one that is not, corrupt or essentially treating not just like the citizens, but like the people who are essentially putting their lives on the line to serve. Let's not treat them like trash. They're like, without it, they're like the blood of that, right? That system. So right. I got a donation. Thank you. Art Fours gave us $10. Thank you. And he says, it's the same as in other public systems. You're not alone. I think that's essentially a statement of support. We did cover that a bit. We know that it happens in colleges and in the workplace and everything, but it sounds like it's extra special in the military. So, and that's something that we should definitely be looking at. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you don't have unanimous jury verdicts in the military. You get 12 as a civilian. I think when I went to court, I got 7. It was 7 members, and they picked who they were. So they control the evidence that's presented, whether you get experts, who the jury are, who they compose of. We have a case where the person admitted some things. And again, none of it was allowed because it would help the accused. And so, yeah, it's a whole lot worse than the colleges and universities. But don't get me wrong. If we don't fight this on all levels, well, then what will they do next?
Exactly.
Someone could falsely accuse you of anything, and they will believe it without evidence. And that is wrong.
Absolutely. 100%. All right. Well, just a reminder, you guys, because I sometimes people file in a little bit later. I just want to show you all the change.org petition is falsely accused and wrongly convicted former military service members need your help. Please check it out. The stories are crazy. I'm going to be bringing on some of Arvis's friends in future shows that will share their stories. We don't really get a lot of opportunity to talk to people in the military, so it's really appreciated, or at least former military. So yeah, I've spoken to cops and lawyers and stuff on the show, and that was always great, but this is a really unique perspective. Thank you, Arvis. And do you have any final words or anything that you want to give to the audience before we wrap it up?
I want to thank them for listening and for having an open mind to hear this, because so many people do not have that. Ask you to please sign and share the petition if you could. And if you've got stories, if you've got evidence to show you were also falsely accused and wrongly convicted in the military, please reach out to us and we'll help you in any way we can. Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
All right, you're welcome. And there is links to all of Arvis's places, his Twitter, the websites, and as well as the petition and his email address, so you can send him a message yourself. And I'm definitely gonna get some more contacts. I want to see that document whenever. You can just email it to us. And thanks for coming on our show. Really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your story. And I think again, we're behind you. We know how awful this can be, and honestly, like, being falsely accused of something this serious is actually traumatizing for the person accused as well. It can be, and so I think that it's I just want to offer that sympathy as well, because I know it can be really tough. So thank Excuse me. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Arvis. Appreciate it. Thank you guys for joining us. If you like this video, and I hope that you do, please hit like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you know when our shows go live. I know that our stuff doesn't normally show up on the front page, and sometimes people don't even see it in their subscriptions, so please consider doing that. Leave us a comment. Let me know what you guys think about what we talked about in the show today. If you have a story to share or some experience, maybe you know somebody in the military that had a similar experience, please. We'd love to hear from you. This is a conversation. This is not a sermon. And please, please, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you so much for coming on today's episode of the Fireside Chat, and we will talk to you all in the next video. Goodbye, everybody.
Men's right activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.